and toes and things of that nature, and how when they are able to count up to 10, they cheer them on. When they get to 20 or 100, they clap for them, they praise them, and so forth, because learning how to count is supposed to be a really great thing. But learning how to count is not always a great thing. The fact is that once you learn to count, you have a career of counting in front of you. And you move from counting, learning how to count your fingers and your toes and your age and things like that, and you graduate to keeping score and counting the runs in a baseball game. You count, the caloric intake. You will count your bank account. You will count your money. You will count those that you owe and those that owe you. You will count everything under the sun. Will become a part of your life, and it will become a career of counting. And you will count from right now all the way to the day that you retire. And even after you retire, you're not going to quit counting. You're still going to be counting. You're going to count the stock market as you watch it. You're going to count your retirement. If you are if you grow up and you become a writer, then you will count how many books you sell. If you become a preacher, you will count attendance. Heaven forbid that you would become an accountant. But you are going to be counting, and you will count for the rest of your life. In fact, the very last breath of your life will be numbered in the days that you live, and you will count and worry, and you will worry, and you will count. So counting is not always a great thing. Now, I know that it's important that we know how to count, okay? But there's some drawbacks to counting, especially when you talk about our faith. And when you talk about spiritual things like being a Christian in a congregation and so forth, counting will become something that is important to you. But I want you to understand something. When you talk about that kind of a thing, our lives, though we count everything, is seldom lived by faith in terms of the counting. Because we're looking for hard numbers. We're looking for the facts that are there. We're concerned on it, and as a result of that is our lives depend on what the numbers say to us, because we keep track of them in our lives. We keep track of them in terms of our achievement or in terms of our accomplishments. And we keep track of our numbers in terms of fear or maybe insecurity. And because of the numbers that don't seem to match up, we become fearful of those things, because sometimes the numbers seem almost unsurmountable. There's no way that you could possibly overcome that which you see right there in front of your face. Have you ever thought how much counting affects our faith? And what we do with our faith? Well, that's what I want to talk to you about this morning. I want to talk to you about counting on our faith. And I want to take you back to the book of Judges, the 6th chapter. To the story of Gideon. These are several familiar sections that I'm going to share with you this morning, but I think they say something to us. As you turn to the book of Gideon or to Judges, where Gideon is talked about, you of course know that in Israel's history, oftentimes they would choose to walk away from God and do evil, and when they would do that, God would judge them. God would punish them, and oftentimes he'd use a foreign nation to oppress them until he got their attention and they changed their lives and cried out to him, and then God would relent and he would send a person to rescue them from their oppression and bring them back once again to freedom. When Judges the 6th through the 8th chapter is the study of Gideon there. And in that section of Scripture, we find that God is going to raise up Gideon to be the Savior of the nation of Israel. Looking at chapter 6 and verse 1. Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave him into the hands of the Midian 7 years. The power of Midian prevailed against Israel. Because of this, the sons of Israel made for themselves dens which were in the mountains and in the caves and in the strongholds, and there they hid. For it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites would come up with the Amalekites and the sons of the east and go against them. So they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, as well as no sheep or ox or donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and with their tents, and they would come like a locust for number. Both they and their camels were innumerable, and they came into the land to devastate it. So Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. Notice it said that when the Midianites would come and the Amalekites and the sons of the east, it says that they were like locusts. One translation says they were as thick as locusts. That means there is a lot of them that are out there, and they would devastate the land and oppress distressed them greatly. The children of Israel would cry out to God, and God heard their message, and the result is that he would raise up a young man by the name of Gideon. And Gideon would look at the task that was before them that God had chosen for him to deal with. In verse 15, it talks about this idea. In fact, in verses 11 and following, it talks about this. But look at verse 15. He said to him, O Lord, how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's house. In other words, Gideon was able to count. He sees the oppression. He knows that Midian and the rest were as numerous as locusts were and so forth. He sees a great people that is there that is oppressing them. And God says, you're going to be the one that I'm going to raise up and you're going to deliver the people. And Gideon, he could count and look at the numbers. And he said, listen, I am least in my family. I'm the youngest of my father's house. Why would you choose me? What is there about me that can make a difference? Look at verse 16 as God responds to Gideon. But the Lord said to him, surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man. Notice what he said. You'll defeat Midian as one man. So Gideon, he buys in, and he decides that he is going to rebel against Midian. And he does so by casting down their great god Bel and so forth. But he decides to rebel against it, and the result is that Midian is going to respond to them. They're going to respond. Look at verse 33 of that section of Scripture. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the sons of the east assembled themselves, and they crossed over and camped in the valley of Jezreel. How many of them were there? Turn over to chapter 7. And I want you to notice in chapter 7, in verse 12, now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the sons of the east were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as numerous as the sand of the seashore. What you're talking about is you're talking about a huge army that is there. Israel had chosen to rebel. Midian responded by sending a great army as numerous as locusts. You saw that picture just a little bit before, as locusts, as numerous as locusts. Have you ever seen a locust swarm? I mean, it's devastating what they can do to crops. What you probably are the most familiar with would be Mormon crickets and so forth. If you've ever seen Mormon crickets on the road, as I have, or on the move as I had, they can devastate a country very quickly. I mean, and not only that, but these guys are pretty smart. When you go to step on one, they see you and they move. So listen, the locusts are there. And what he's saying is that, listen, Midian became as a great, huge army like locusts, as many as the sand of the seashore. Try counting the sand on a seashore sometime. You're talking about something that is formidable, that is there, and Gideon is going to have to deal with it. So what was he going to do? Well, Gideon decides to blow the trumpet and to call for the people. Verse 34. For the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called together to follow him. Verse 35, messengers are sent out to the tune that once they were all called. How many answered the call? Well, about 32,000 answered the call to go. But God said in verse 2 of chapter 7, that's way too many. Look at verse 7, verse 1. Chapter 7 and verse 1. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into their hands, for Israel would become boastful, saying, by my own power I have delivered myself. So they end up having like 32,000. I know that because a couple of verses down says that they begin to talk about it, and God said that's too many, and there were like 32,000, but 22,000 decide to leave, and that means that they were then reduced to 10,000. That number is wrong behind me, by the way. It should be 22,000. It should be 10,000. So listen, here's an army that is as numerous as the sand of the seashore. Here's an army that is like locusts. There's so many of them, a huge army, and what do they have to go up against him? Well, they begin with 32,000. That doesn't sound like the best odds to me, but God says that's way too many. You need to reduce them down. Tell those who are afraid of the fight to go home. 22,000 said, oh, that's us. And they left, and now they're reduced down to 10,000, and God says that's still too many. Too many there, and so they go and they reduce it all the way down to 300. 300 individuals are going to go up against an army as many as the locusts are there or could be there, a swarm of locusts, as many as the sand on a seashore. And that 300 is supposed to take out this great numerous army. 300 individuals. Well, God had a plan, and God's plan with these 300, I will give Midian into your hand. That's a promise that God is going to make to Gideon, that he can take care of business by trusting in God to do what he said he would do. So God says, I'll give the people into your hand. Here is the plan. So he receives a plan, and then he takes the plan and he gives it to the 300. And he says to the 300, we are going to divide ourselves up into three companies, about 300 each. And the plan is this. We're going to surround the encampment of the Midianites. You'll have a sword, but you'll also have a trumpet, and you'll have a pitcher, and inside the pitcher it's going to be empty, but we're going to put a torch inside that. When you see what I do, you need to follow suit. And so what we're going to do is we're going to surround them, and at the moment that is right, we are going to break our pitchers so that the torches become obvious to everyone that is around us. We're going to blow a trumpet, and you're going to say, for God and for Gideon. That's the plan. That's how we're going to beat these guys. Now, I don't know about you, but in my mind, numbers count, and I would say, now wait a second, 300 against like 100,000, and we're supposed to take those guys out with a trumpet and with a pitcher and a torch inside that, and that's the plan? Is there not a plan B somewhere? Well, that's the plan. So the three companies, they divide up and they surround them, and at the moment, Gideon broke his pitcher, which reveals the torch. He blows the trumpet, and everyone follows suit, and they all shout with a great shout, for God and for Gideon, or for the Lord and for the sword of Gideon. And that's what they do. And when that happens, the Bible says the Lord set the sword of the enemy against one another. They begin to kill one another. In other words, in their minds, they think there's a lot more around them than just 300 individuals. There's a lot of noise going on. There's a lot of shouting going on. They're caught dead sleep and so forth. And when they get up, they're in a panic mode, and they begin to swing at anybody that is close to them. You say, there's no way that could possibly happen. Yes, there is a way that could happen. I may have shared this with you. I'm not sure that I have, but my dad fought in the Second World War. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge and in the Ardennes forced and so forth. And one time he was telling me that they were on a forced march. And on the forced march, they went through the day, they traveled through the night, and in his squad, they had a half track. They have no lights are completely out, so there's no light, so it's dependent upon them follow the guy in front of them. When they go, they go. When they stop, they stop. My dad said to his men, he said, now listen, guys, no one can sleep. You guys got to stay awake. If you guys fall asleep and we get lost, we'll never find ourselves out of here, and we'll end up becoming captives, so you got to stay awake. One of the guys fell asleep. So my dad took a .30 caliber machine gun that was on the turret of this thing, and he put it on top of this guy's helmet. And he touched off a single burst. And when he did, he said the whole company, the whole entourage of trucks and tanks, all that, they all stopped, and they all opened fire. And he says, and they shot for like 30 minutes straight, just shooting out into the dark. And when it was done, he said it got light and they were still there. He said the landscape was completely just cut low. The trees, the bushes were just devastated. There was no enemy there. There was a single guy that pulled a trigger, and everyone went to shooting everything that moved out in the dark. So panic can happen, and that's what God uses. God uses that against them. The result of that is that they begin to kill and destroy one another, and then they become routed. Now listen, the message is this: if you count the numbers, 300 against an army like locusts, who should have won? Well, the answer is obvious, isn't it? The answer is that the army of Midian should have wiped up the children of Israel's army very easily, but that's not what happened. Why is it? Because when God is behind something, numbers don't always count. But faith in action does. God says, I'll bring Midian down by one man. If you have faith, that will be enough to overcome the armies of the Midianites. And that's exactly what happened. They put them en route, they chased them to the end, and they slew them, and they cast off the oppression, and Gideon became a judge for a number of years after that. Fast forward with me now 200 years to 1 Samuel, the 16th chapter and the 17th chapter. Of course, you know that the familiar story of David and Goliath. On one hand, you have Goliath, who would come out as a champion. He's a champion because he had won a number of one-on-one battles, and he had been successful in war as well. He's 9 foot 6 inches tall. He's a trained warrior. He's a champion. His armor alone weighs about 155 pounds. That might be much less than what it really was, but at least 155 pounds, probably as much as David weighed anyway. And he comes out threatening with slaughter, saying, bring out your best and let he and I fight, and we'll decide this war right here and now. Now, that'd be pretty easy to do if you're 9 foot 6 inches tall and we're a champion and an experienced warrior and fought lots of sword fights and things of that nature. But when you're not, that's another thing. One time in my life, I remember I was in a place at work, and I was saying some things to a guy that I should not have been saying. This guy was like, seriously, he is 6 foot 9 inches tall. He was a defensive tackle for Oklahoma State University at one time. And I said something that I should not say, and he grabbed me. Let me tell you what, when you're 6 foot and a guy who's 6 foot 9 and used to be a tackle grabs you, you are thoroughly grabbed. Thoroughly grabbed. And I mean, I could not wiggle. And I remember he grabbed me and he had me at arm's length, which means his arms are that much longer than mine, which means I'd be doing this at him. And he's got me at arm's length, and he draws back his fist. And he says, how would you like me to knock your head off? He didn't say those words, but similar to them with some expletives. How would you like me to knock your head off? Well, so you know exactly what I did, right? I didn't do anything. Now, let me ask you, well, actually, I thought to myself, if I hit this guy in the jaw with my helmet, my hard hat, maybe he's got a glass jaw and he'll go down. But most likely he will not, and my head will come off. Well, could you imagine 9 foot 6 inches grabbing you? 9 foot 6 inches of a guy who is a warrior. You're talking about a big dude. Now you have David. He's the youngest in his house. The Bible says he is a ruddy youth, which means he is probably, he's probably weathered and so forth. But it also says he is handsome. He probably didn't even weigh as much as Goliath's armor did. He's certainly inexperienced in battle. Yes, he'd killed a bear and a lion, but not a 9 foot 6 inch guy that really knows how to fight back, who has a spear and a huge sword in his hand. Well, eventually time will come on, to make a long story short. David and Goliath will come face to face with one another. Look at chapter 17, beginning in verse 41. Chapter 17, beginning in verse 41. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with a shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy, with handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day, listen to this, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you, and I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hands. Underline that if you don't mind doing that the battle is the Lord's. Then it happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of his sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw this, that their champion was dead, they fled. And Israel pursued them, and they routed them, and they won the victory. Now here's my point. My point is this: David should never have won that fight. Should never have won that fight. David knew by his own strength that it was an impossibility. But here was his word: this is the Lord's battle. The Lord will give you into my hands, and we'll give the Philistines into our hands, and we're going to litter this place with dead bodies. That's what he said. So he shouldn't have won the fight. But when God is behind someone, size doesn't matter. It's faith and action that does. And I could go story after story after story. I could share with you Jonathan and his armor bearer at Michmash when they went up against the Philistines, who once again were as many as the sand of the seashore. And the Israel's army was 32,000, but they had reduced down to 600 at Michmash. And Jonathan and his armor bearer said, let's go up to these people. If they call us up, then we will go up to them. And they went up and they walked through them, and they made a swath, about 20 men that they hacked down before they were done. And that routed the Philistines. And then Saul's armies went up against them and defeated them. They should not have won that battle. But when God is behind someone, numbers don't count. Faith in action does. Samson goes up against, I don't know how many thousand of the Philistines, but it said that he slayed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. A jawbone. You can see the picture behind me. That doesn't look all that formidable. But it was formidable in a person than which the Spirit of God had come over. When God is behind someone, numbers don't count. Faith in action does. And it's the same when you talk about meeting the challenges or the obstacles or a great undertaking that we find in our lives or even as a congregation. Last week I shared with you a number of ministries and projects that we're going to do in 2017 that's going to really challenge us. But listen, the numbers don't count. Faith and actions count. Listen, when you talk about anything that comes up against, whether it's an obstacle or whether it's a challenge or a great undertaking, don't count God out. And don't just count on your abilities or your talents or your pocketbook or your bank account. Because God owns all the cattle on 1,000 hills. And he owns every treasury that is there. In fact, he has treasuries in heaven that he can open up and see if he can outgive us. Just don't count on what you can see. For we walk by faith and not always by sight. And not only that, but if we can meet the challenges that are placed before us or the obstacles, and if we can do it on our own, if we can do it by our own strength or might, then why would we need God? And why would we need to have faith in God? But when we put our trust in him, we can do amazing things. Here's the only number worth counting. If you can count up to 1, then that's all the counting you need to do to put your faith and your trust in the only one who is worthy of our confidence. And so when God is behind people, numbers don't count. Size doesn't count. What counts is your faith and then putting it into action. Now, I've said all this to you this morning because, as you know, for several years now, we have been working on a building project for our congregation. I shared with you some challenges last week, but we're going to share a really huge one with you this morning. We're going to talk about this new building that we have been working on for years now, certainly intensely for months. And so we're going to share with you some of the findings that the leadership has found. So, Wendell.
Thank you, Richard. Wonderful. Into a discussion now of the building planning. Some of the guiding principles, hopefully you can see this. Habakkuk 2 and verse 2, the Lord answered me, write down the vision, write it clearly on clay tablets, so whoever reads it can run to tell others. When the building planning team started, that was our guiding principle. We wanted to write down everything so everyone understood what we were doing and where we were going. Another guiding principle is first finish your outside work and prepare your fields. After that, you can build your house. Makes sense, doesn't it? You need to get ready to do the building. The fun work of framing it up and getting things together doesn't happen until you've done a lot of planning and thoughtful preparation before you get started. So, where have we been? I thought this was appropriate considering the weather we have had. Back and you see some of the snow that we've trounced through. But in 1992, this original building that you're sitting in, basically just these two sections, was started. It was built. In 1995 was the first addition, south wing of the auditorium, nursery, restroom, and classroom. In 2005 to 2006 time frame, a second addition was made. You folks sitting over here were added. And then the lobby. And then the parts of the fellowship hall, covered drive-through entryway. And in 2008, third edition, expanded the fellowship room, additional classrooms to the west and south, additional restrooms and a resource room. You saw how that grew. It kept going. And in 2013, we had our fourth remodel. Back in the corner there, we rearranged some walls so we could have a few more classrooms of the area that was back there. History continued, if you will. In 2012, we purchased a bank-owned property, we tend to refer to it, of about 21.8 acres. Sometimes we rounded it off to 22 acres, but I think after you do the amount that you can really use, it's down to about 19. But we purchased it for about $220,000, so that's $10,000 an acre if you start with 22 instead of the 2.8. 21.8. But you can see, if you go out and try to find this type of property today, you can't find it. That time frame, it was brought to us, we were kind of looking. We weren't looking really extremely serious, but the Lord dropped this into our lap. He gave us an opportunity. I'm reminded of a story of an individual who says there's a flood in the area, his house is surrounded by water, and he says to the first person that comes by in a boat, come into my boat and I'll take you to safety. He says, no, I'm waiting for the Lord to save me. In a little while, a helicopter came by, dropped a rope down. He sent a note back up, I'm waiting for the Lord to save me. And so finally the water reached him, and he perished. When he got before the Lord, he says to the Lord, why didn't you save me? He said, well, I sent you a boat and a helicopter. So we've been dropped 21.8 acres into our laps, and you can't touch that type of property today. This is it. If you haven't been out there, I highly encourage you to go there and look at it. Go through the gate, walk around. Pick up some trash too while you're out there. Take it home with you. And so in 2013, the building planning team was established. We began to dream, to sit down and talk about what we think we would like to see. Many people have been involved. Brother Richard Jewell and Brother Don Hilton have been my closest consultants as far as their experiences. Has been very helpful in understanding this process. You may recall Don Hilton builds tunnels for a living. I did ask him if he was able to work above ground when I asked him to work with me. Richard Jewell has had much experience in developing neighborhoods and stuff like that, so they've got some extensive experience in doing a complex project like this. And I appreciate and greatly esteem their counsel that they give me. Also, in 2015, we became debt-free. We don't owe anything on this building. We don't owe anything on the property. In 2015, we also hired LCA architects to develop a master plan to guide the construction as the Lord provides the growth. And the building fund currently sits at $220,690. That's your generosity. That's what you have given the Lord for this project. Again, looking at this project, this particular property, I reoriented it to where this is Ustick Road right here. And this direction here on my side is the north. So that would be south, and that would be west and east. I think that's right. And this is the master plan of that property that the architect has suggested. Now, conceptually, this is what I call a concept. It's conceptual. In other words, it's a work in progress. So these lines, a big eraser can erase them. They can move. The problem is when you actually start building something, that actually can't be changed too easily. But in this phase, you can dream, you can change things, but basically the concept is this would be the footprint of the final build out. Now we're not talking, this is not the first thing we're going to build. I'll show that in a second. But the final build out and long term will guide us. This is a potential of what the future we could do on the future. This area here shows multifamily homes, if you will, apartments. We have another concept, it's a work in progress, that actually shows individual housing, like a small subdivision back there. So that's another option. And this area right over here could be some kind of commercial entity. I suggest a Starbucks, but you could also have a Maverick. You could have some other, I guess you could have some kind of restaurant, But I like the idea of Starbucks. You can go there and have a latte and look across at the new building property. Now, some concepts that are being dealt with. This particular footprint represents the final build-out of a 1,000-seat auditorium capability. But we're not going to build that the first time. I'll show that in a second. This area represents a potential amphitheater, outdoor amphitheater kind of setting. This will be a berm going around here, and this area could be a gathering place, and so that you could have, much like if you've been over to the bandshell over at Kleiner Park, you could have that kind of environment. This area represents a patio playground area that's fenced in so that our children can go out here and enjoy themselves in a safe environment. You can come and participate in that, if you wanted to have care group meetings there, that there's a patio there when we have the congregation get together. There's an area to get together. Now, just keep in mind that I'm not sure what type of tree this is, so don't ask me those kinds of things. It's a concept. It's a plan in work, if you will. So, phase one, what is it that we're looking at potentially building initially? This represents the floor plan of the current concept. After the presentation today, you'll be able to see in the back of the room there are some poster boards of these concepts that you can look at a little closer. This represents the auditorium. Our first phase, we look at seating capacity of about 600. This area here is classrooms, and you'll notice that this black line around here, it represents the final build-out auditorium. Once the Lord gives us the growth and we need to move out of that auditorium, but initially we don't need this entire space for the auditorium seating. So we're going to use this as classrooms. This represents the office area. We'll have a larger drive-up area, a library. This represents the fellowship area, that's being the kitchen, and then classrooms with dividers that can be moved around. For those who do preparation for the Lord's Supper, you know how tight it is in there, right? Well, this area right here is going to be that prep area. There's going to be a long table, there's a refrigerator. Talk about plenty of room. You'll be able to do it all there. This particular area right here looks like it might be sitting out by itself, and it sort of is in the initial phase, but this is where the mechanical area is going to be, and you'll see a representation of how they're going to make it heating and air conditioning thing look a little bit better than what we normally see. When you get a chance, these are back in the back, so go by and look at them. It's color-coded, so you can see what they are notionally planning for. Now, just keep in mind that when you look at the final build-out, this one got skewed a little bit differently, but it's fuzzy for a reason. It's the final build-out, and my PowerPoint didn't work right, okay? But you'll see that this area from here and around is not in the first phase, and same from, let me see if I can get a better representation, from here over is not built. So those areas are actually going to be in this area here. So as we grow this auditorium, we're going to actually move these rooms that were in here out of here and then build around to the edge. And basically this is the nursery area. You could literally be born, go to the nursery and work your way around at preschool, elementary, high school, and college-ish, and then adult area. So you can work your way all the way around the building. So back to this area, I talked a little bit about this being an amphitheater kind of thing, this being the playground area. And this represents the final build-out so that when we get there. Now, what does it look like? What's this first phase going to look like? So we hired this artist to represent what it's going to look like. And he's very a talented artist too, I might add. And so this will look basically something like this. Remember, it's a concept. This area right here is the kind of a tower thing, but inside it's where the HVAC is. These are kind of where the air comes through, but it's artistically done in a way that looks attractive. I'm sorry, this is what it would look like from Ustick Road. So you're looking from the north to the front of the building, if you will. And this is from the west. This is what you'll see when you're sitting at Starbucks. And this is from the south, if you're in the parking lot. And this is from, if you're coming from the Hayden subdivision. So, from a point of view of what phases we're using, we're using the best practices out there, I believe. We've done the research and planning. We now have a conceptual design, and now we're at the fun part, fundraising. We're going to put together a financial planning team. If you're interested in participating, or at least got some good ideas that you want to share, see Dave Rich. He'll be glad to take those names, those ideas. And then we have to also come up with a final design. Final design also includes a construction plan so that we can start building that. And these two can probably do it at the same time, but we've got to secure the financing before we can do the construction. Luke 14, 28 through 30. I love this particular scripture. It keeps it in perspective. If you want to build a tower, you first sit down and decide how much it will cost to see if you have enough money to finish the job. If you don't, you may lay the foundation, but you would not be able to finish. Then all who would see it would make fun of you, saying, "This person began to build, but was not able to finish." Brothers and sisters, we want to start, but more importantly, we want to finish. This particular building is a tool for God. It is a tool for us to glorify God in this community. While we may have a small funds, if you will, because when you look at the $220,000 we have sitting in our building fund, it's got to grow it's got to grow. Okay? When this building was originally started, just the sections here in the center, about $330,000. In 1992, that was a lot of money, especially for the numbers of people that were here. But it happened. You're sitting in it. You guys are sitting in the ones in the additions. And the folks that are in a remote service are sitting in the addition. It grew. Now consider these. We have values. This building is debt-free, so that we would obviously sell it. There's value here. There's also value in the property. At one time, it was valued at $1.6 million before everything went down, and we got it for $220,000. There's value there. That's where the financial planning team is going to look at our values and how we're going to approach moving from this facility to that facility. So now that you've seen the number, write it down. And how can you help? Give God the glory for the growth He sends. It's not us. It's God that's growing this congregation. We have the beautiful problem of what do we do as we outgrow this facility. Pray for the building team and all who assist them. Building design considerations, share your ideas with us. Someone did suggest a geodesic dome. It keeps ice dams down. So, all ways of doing things, but share them with us. Property work day. Make plans to participate. Care groups. Here's an idea. Let's go stake out a care group area. We'll put your sign up. Care group 6 does this area. And clean it up. Keep it perfect. Have an event out there. Now, I wouldn't suggest you go out now unless you like to snowshoe. Plan an event out there to have hot dogs. There's a fire pit already out there. Our young folks have been out there several times. You have an opportunity. So in January, the elders have set aside 4 Sundays out of the year to dedicate the contribution to the building project. January 29th is the first time that happens for that date, or that'll happen for the 2017. But consider your contribution for the Sundays that are dedicated toward that building project. And so I'll leave it at that. Any questions, please see me or Richard or Don, and we'll be glad to discuss. Richard? Don't know if he did.
So now you know why I talked about numbers. Because, and I even mentioned last week that when you look at $6.5 million, it's kind of one of those things where you feel gut punched and it kind of takes the air out of you a little bit. But listen, when God's behind something, numbers don't count. Faith in action does. I don't know what God has planned for us in this area, but I know He has great things planned for us. I was thinking about this, the whole idea of faith. When I was a young man, I had 3 daughters, and I remember Jill was my first daughter, okay, and I remember taking her and when she was just a little girl, and I would hold her up, and I was getting ready to toss her into the air. So I held her out, and I was getting ready to toss her, and she had this look on her eyes like, what are you getting ready to do? This can't be good. And I took her, and I was doing this with her, and she had this fear in her eyes, and then I tossed her in the air. When I tossed her in the air, she had this look in her eyes like, this is bad. And she floated in the air for a moment, and then she came back down. When she came back, I caught her. And when I caught her, there was this look of surprise on her face, and a smile, and even a giggle. And then when I throw her up again, she would laugh, and then she'd come down. And the more I did that, the more happier she'd become, and the more trusting she became, because she knew that no matter how high I threw her, Dad was going to catch her when she came back down. And I have to be honest with you, when I did that, my wife looked at me like, what are you doing with my baby? And I did it from the time that she was probably 9 months old until she was probably too heavy to throw like that. But I would throw her up and she would come back down. It's really a faith thing. I mean, she had to trust in me. And it didn't matter how high I threw her. She knew that I was going to be there to catch her. I believe that that's what God is doing with our congregation. I believe that's what He does with our lives. I think oftentimes He throws us into the air and sees how much we're going to trust Him. Will we really trust Him to catch us? Will we really trust Him to take care of us? I know we face some huge challenges before us, but we can do great things for the Lord. If we had room, for so many years we had been just almost stopped by our church building. The barrier has just been so hard to overcome. This will give us freedom to grow and to reach out to those who are lost. So please consider your thoughts about it and share them with us. That's why we've shared this with you this morning, so that you can give us some of your input and your thoughts about it. We can't move forward unless you move with us. And so by faith, we can do some incredible things. By faith, one is saved as well. God sent His Son into the world in order that He might die so that you could be saved. Or you're a Christian. If you were to die today, would you know for sure, nothing down, that you would go to heaven? If not, why not make that so today by being baptized into Christ for the remission of your sins? Whatever your need is, would you come while together we stand and sing and give you opportunity.
I care not today what the morrow may bring.